Merhaba arkadaşlar, Aydaki Adam'da bugün gerçekten özel bir konuğumuz var. Meşhur Adam Fawer.
Welcome. Thank you.
You are here in Turkey for your last book.
Hopefully not the last.
Hopefully not the last. Mobius. I read the book thanks to the publisher before the print. How did you come up with the idea?
That's a fantastic question. I'm getting older now. I feel like in life, the older I get, the more regrets I have.
I know what you're talking about.
And when I was much younger, I feel like I kind of like live with no regrets. But as you get older, you see like the consequences of all the decisions that you've made. I feel like I'm very lucky. I'm very blessed. I have a great life. I'm very happy with it. But I can point to 2 or 3 decisions that as I look back were like the wrong decisions. And as I get older, there have been moments in my life where I've been like obsessed about like one little moment in time. And if I had just gone left instead of right. And literally there have been a couple decisions where I've like thought about it for years. So I was sort of like obsessed with that idea. And that's why I wanted to make a story about time travel. The other reason is the universe that takes place. And all of my books I try to make really grounded.
Actually, the same theme was also evident in your first book. I mean, the possibilities.
Right. It's about fate and it's about determination.
You have an issue with these topics, right?
An issue, an obsession. It depends how you phrase it. Also, I've been working in startups for over 20 years. It's a really intense world.
That surprised me, by the way. You know that area.
Yeah, I've been working intensely in startups for 20 years, and I've have written during breaks in my career.
Were they successful, your startups?
The last one was successful, which has allowed me to now focus on my writing. A few years ago, I quit my job.
That's the thing with the startups. Once you are successful, you are out of business, right?
It depends who you are. You could be Elon Musk and he had a success with PayPal, but then he turned around and he put more money and he wanted to do more and more startups. And for me, although I really enjoyed my time in startups, I think what I really am and what I want to be is a storyteller. Unfortunately, being a novelist can't support a family.
In the beginning.
And so early on, I had written more of my first book before I had any children and finished my second book before my second son was born. But then I had to make a choice and I had to choose my family.
Okay, let's get back to the book. In this age, you need courage to write a book about time travel because it's been done many times. So were you scared a little bit? How did you come up with something new?
Right.
Because you came up with something new.
Thank you. There's an expression someone said to me once, which is God is in the execution. And so I think that if you execute something well, every story has already been told. And then you can look back at a classic like Star Wars, but then you look back further, decades further, and it's like, it's a ripoff of this story or this story or this story. So I think you can't get caught up in, has this been done before? Because everything's been done before. You have to focus, or at least I feel like I have to focus on executing my vision as well as I can. I thought I did have a unique take, and if I talk about my unique take, it kind of gives away the end. So I won't do that. I love time travel stories and movies and TV shows. I've seen lots of them and been inspired by them.
For our generation, it was Back to the Future, for example.
It was Back to the Future. It was The Terminator. It was Terminator 2. There was a series in the 80s called Voyagers. Robert A. Heinlein wrote a great book, I think in the 50s, called Door into Summer, which was like the first time travel story I ever read. I think I read it when I was 10 and I was like obsessed with that idea.
It's a fantastic idea.
Right, and it's a fantastic idea. And I was thinking like, why do time travel stories keep getting made like over and over again? And again, I think it's about regret. And it's about how people wish they could go back and do something over. It would be the ultimate superpower. And there's not a person I know that if they could go back and change something, that they wouldn't.
The tragedy didn't happen to you, right?
No. There's a tragedy in the book, and it's my greatest fear. And again, I don't like to spoil the book, but this book is the closest to who I am of anything I've written. And I wrote it in first person, and the protagonist is similar to me. I would call it like me at my worst. So I was like really able to like put myself in the character. Character experiences a tragedy. Like I have this one fear, which is my greatest fear. So I made that fear come to life in my protagonist's life. Again, I've worked in startups for over 20 years, and ultimately it was successful, but it was like a very rough ride along the way. Bad things happened to me. I did some bad things.
Really?
Sure. So I tried to like put that into the novel too. What I was trying to write was, I was just trying to really get across, like time travel is in the book, but in a way, it's not a big thing in the book.
Yes, that's what struck me.
What the story I'm trying to tell was about being a father and working in a startup and trying to balance fatherhood with the pressures of work, and how it's impossible to do either one as well as you want at the same time. So if you put focus in one area, you lose focus in the other area.
All the characters in the book, except Jim maybe, they are not good. Why is that? I mean, they don't like themselves, they don't trust each other. Why is that?
I wouldn't quite describe it that way. And again, I wanted to write like a really tight story. So it's about the startup with two co-founders that my protagonist joins.
Does it come from your experience of startups?
Yes,
I mean,
yes, it
nobody
does.
trusts nobody.
It's not that nobody trusts nobody. It's just that what happens a lot in Silicon Valley is you have these very intelligent, very young founders, and they're given a lot of power and a lot of money, and a lot of people are like looking up to them, but they don't have that much experience. And so it's not that they're not good. I have like tremendous empathy for all the characters in my book. It's that they're feeling insecure.
Yes, you like them. You can see that.
Right. And it's just that they're young. And when you're young, you're insecure and you make mistakes and you make terrible mistakes. It's just that nature. And so I was also looking at this book coming from the point of view of a 50-something-year-old person. You can see those mistakes because you've made them and you're watching young people make them and it drives you crazy, but also you made them when you were young.
Most of the startups go down, right?
Oh, almost all startups fail. You hear about these amazing success stories like a YouTube or like an Instagram or something like that. But 90% of startups just flat out go out of business, disappear, never to be heard from again.
What happens to them in general?
They run out of money, just close the doors.
And they go work with a salary, right?
Not always. The interesting thing with Silicon Valley is that the venture capitalists who fund these startups know how difficult it is. You learn much more from your failures than your successes. And so if you're a founder of a startup that failed, they're more likely to invest in you because they feel like you've learned some really good lessons.
I'm asking this because I invested in a startup. So probably it will go down.
Oh, yes, that was a foolish investment. I advise startups now. I meet with like a lot of young CEOs. And when you're a CEO of a startup, you're always raising money. Always, always, always. At the end of it, like my first or second meeting, and they're excited and they're pitching me their idea. And I'm saying, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'm happy to be an advisor for you. And they're like, do you think about investing? And I'm always like, no. Never.
Isn't it interesting? They never make money. In 10 years, they hope to make money.
Yeah, Amazon was unprofitable for over a decade. Google was unprofitable for the first few years. OpenAI, which has created ChatGPT, they're raising billions of dollars and not making money. The venture capitalists have an incredible amount of money and they need to put it to use. They need investments so that they can make the return.
It's also in the book. Can we tell about what happens in the book a little bit?
Sure.
I was very surprised. I didn't know it was about time travel. And I didn't also know you were into startups. It was very surprising for me. A startup comes up with a time travel machine. How would that be in real life?
I think it could be like it is in the book. I tried to make it really grounded. I love tons of books, tons of movies, tons of TV shows, but there are kind of two different types. One type is it's kind of pulpy. It's kind of fabulous. It's kind of like ridiculous. Like this scenario would never happen. And if it did happen, this character wouldn't really react in this way. I enjoy those, but I don't want to write that type of book. So I like to write a story where things are really, really grounded. And I tried to put myself in the mind of each of my characters and thought, and especially because it's first person, the protagonist, I always thought, if I was this protagonist with this background, and his background's very similar to mine, except he had a tragedy that thank God I didn't have, what would I do? How would I really react?
Yeah, it was very believable. Except one thing, that's something I would like to ask also. Technically, you don't try to explain how things happen, and it's understandable. I mean, you can't know how a time travel machine works. But you always have a very scientific background in your books. So are you into science? Because you studied statistics.
I studied statistics and business.
The question is this. Do you know how this machine works really?
Well, I kind of base it off of string theory. Like, I'm a science hobbyist, I guess you would say. And, and I read a lot of magazines and articles and listen to science podcasts and things like that. The reason I base this in science, and you and I were talking earlier, like when I wrote my first book, Improbable, there was an earlier version of that book that no one's ever seen, except for a couple editors who said it was garbage. And But one editor said something that completely, it was sort of a separator for me. It completely changed my writing. And what he said is, because it was sort of a fantastical idea and improbable of a man who could like understand the consequences of all of his actions. He said, I wish it was more grounded. He said, in Jurassic Park, they talk about how there was a mosquito, an ancient mosquito caught in amber.
It's like a documentary. They tell you about how old the thing happened.
And they talk about how there was like dinosaur blood in the mosquito that was trapped in amber for millions of years. And they extracted the DNA from the blood and they were able to clone dinosaurs. I'm sure it doesn't work that way. But as a layman, just a person who wants some escapism and wants to read a book, you read that and you're like, yes, that would totally work. So I always think in my books, think about the mosquito in the amber and what's the mosquito in the amber for this book. And so when I talk about time travel, I read some interesting things about string theory. I put that together and I thought that's one, if you believe in string theory and you could access like 11-dimensional space, that is a way that you could achieve time travel. And so I hope as like a reader, you're reading it and some of it's a little confusing, but you kind of barely grasp the theory, but the theory seems to make sense and it makes sense of that's how the machine could work.
It was explained as some paper, some cables, and a little metal part. So
yes, I don't explain the exact mechanics.
Which is good, by the way, because when you read a novel, you have to suspend your expectations.
Right. I believe that in good stories like this, that are science fiction based, you need some suspension of disbelief, but only for like one thing. And then everything else should be exactly as the world is. But if you start doing too much suspension of disbelief, then people start rolling their eyes.
Your books have some movie-like quality. I mean, it's a 500-page book. I read it in 2 days. So they are really page turners. How do you achieve that?
I achieve it by cutting. So that 500-page book, when I finished it, was 1,200 pages.
Ooh.
And then you just have to go in and you have to be brutal. And the way I write is every day I sit down, I reread the last paragraph I wrote the day before, and I just start writing. And I never edit until I'm finished. So I'm sort of telling myself the story. And I don't always know exactly where it's going. And as I tell myself the story, sometimes I'm telling myself a piece of the story that no one needs to read about, but I need to know about. I need to understand it. The way I think I can get it to be a page turner is I just go back and I cut and I cut and I cut. And so the first cut, I'm like, I need to cut out half the pages. That's sort of the easiest in a way because I cut out giant sections of the book. And I realized this isn't needed. I had a 60-page section in the book that was just like entirely cut out. And I could summarize that in a paragraph. And then I just go over every scene. And I'm not much of a handyman or a carpenter. But when I was a kid, I was in a woodworking class. And I remember sanding down the wood. And you could sand down wood forever. Yes, forever. And it just keeps getting smooth. Like if you're thinking about a corner, you can just get that corner smoother and smoother and smoother and smoother. And that's how I think about writing is like, okay, now can I look at this scene and cut out 10% more? And then I go over it again. What about another 10%?
Why don't you try to write less in the beginning?
Because I'm very interested in plot, and I think plots make the book a page turner. And so I need to figure out what the story is. And there are some parts of the plot that are unnecessary. And so if I worked really hard the first time around getting this paragraph perfect, it likely will be a wasted effort because there's a good chance I'll end up cutting that paragraph.
Is this your process? You start with the plot?
No, I start with an idea of the plot, and then I start creating the characters. And the other thing that happens, and again, I could just speak for my own process, you learn more about the characters as you're going. And so at about the halfway point, you're like, I really get this character now. And so the second half of my book in the first draft needs a whole lot less editing because I understand that character's motivations and their quirks and their personality. So the character at the end of the book is very different than the character at the beginning. And then when I reread it, I change it. I change that character to mesh with what I know he or she will turn out to be. If you got your characters down really well, I'm not writing the story anymore. I have my characters in a certain situation and I just try to think now what would they do? And I let the characters tell the story.
So you create a mechanism and it runs by itself.
Like sculptors talk about finding the statue in the stone.
There's a major conflict in the book, Rowan and Andy, the inventor, the real genius, and the businessman. I felt like you have sympathy for Rowan. Is that correct?
I have sympathy for both of them.
But a little bit more maybe.
But yeah, a bit more with her than with him.
But then again, you are on the other side. You are the business partner.
I'm a business guy. The thing about startups is that people just get screwed all the time.
Were you fired anytime?
Oh, yeah. I was fired from a startup that I co-founded, but it was the ultimate quit fire. You know, like some people like, you can't break up with me. I'm breaking up with you. So the day I was fired, I already had a job lined up because I was so mad I was about to quit. And so they fired me before I could quit, but it was not working out.
You were talking about Rowan.
Elon Musk is a brilliant entrepreneur, but he's not actually super technical. He's not the one who's designing the rockets.
Like Steve Jobs.
Exactly. Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, they have an incredible vision and they inspire people to follow that vision. Johnny Ive, who designed the iPhone. I know that name because I'm in tech, but most people don't know that name. It's the technical people who create the things often don't get the same credit as the CEO who's in front and is the face of the company. And I've met dozens and dozens of CEOs. A lot of times they're just really great presenters of other people's work that they sort of take credit for.
Can we think the same thing about publishing? Is the writer more important than the publisher or the publisher?
I love my publisher.
That's why I'm asking.
So in my case, I have a wonderful editor, Nazla, and my publisher is April Publisher, and one of the partners is a guy by the name of Egeman, who I love. My first novel, and now all my novels, are much more popular in Turkey than any place else in the world. Yeah. I have lots of theories about this, and I think a lot of things came together to make that happen. But one of the things that happened was I had a publisher who really, really, really believed in my book.
So it's the same thing like startups.
You need somebody to believe in it and to have a vision and to push.
So this can be offensive, but do you believe in fate?
I don't think that's offensive. You would think I would have an answer off the top of my head. A little bit.
Because fate is a common theme.
Fate's a common theme. Fate's sort of an obsession of mine. And that's what like Improbable is about. And that's really what this book is about is, are we all making our own decisions?
Do we have free will?
Do we have free will? Is the path already set in stone? Or maybe we are making our own decisions, but like exogenous forces are hitting us with so many things that the decision that we'll make is obvious. And how does that relate to God? Because if God knows everything that ever was, which if you believe in God, you typically believe in that.
Do you believe in God?
I don't.
It's strange because I don't want to spoil, but the ending of the book, it feels like there's a higher power in your universe.
That's interesting.
Because it corrects itself according to the original story.
Just because I don't believe in God doesn't mean I don't believe in some level of like fate or destiny. And I do feel like it's really hard to break out of the world. And it's really hard to change your own situation. But I also think that you can change your situation, but it takes a crazy amount of effort. And typically, sometimes it feels like, and this will sound like narcissistic, but I think everybody kind of feels that way. It's like the universe is against me, is like pushing me in this different way. The best successes I've ever had have been when I really fought against that. And the biggest failures and mistakes I've ever made have been when I just sort of went along with what was happening.
Stanley Kubrick said once, the universe doesn't care about you. The universe doesn't know we exist, maybe.
I firmly believe that. I firmly believe the universe doesn't care about you, but like, and so the universe is just like going along its merry way, living its life, and you are like the fly on the back of the dragon that is that universe, and the dragon doesn't know about the fly, but you have to try to exist in that world.
Okay, let's talk about a little bit American politics.
All right.
So what do you think about the election coming up?
That's a pretty broad question. It's on a razor's edge. No one knows who is going to win.
Are you interested in politics?
Tremendously. Too much so. I listen to a lot of politics podcasts.
But your books aren't politics.
Because I don't have experience in politics. And I've thought about it, and I would like to write something a little bit more political, but I have a crazy amount of experience in startups. It was very comfortable for me to write a novel in the world of startups. And my next novel also, which I'm halfway through, or maybe a fourth of the way through, is also in the world of startups. So that's what I'm writing about now. But going back to politics, no one knows who's going to win. They're both neck and neck. And the problem is, at least in America, that the country is really, really divided into two separate groups.
Yeah, extremely polarized, just like in Turkey.
And what happens is people in the US, there are people like me. I hate Donald Trump. and desperately want him to lose. And I read certain media outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post that I believe is source of truth or mostly true. And there are other people who love Donald Trump and they don't read those newspapers and they watch Fox News or read other things. The facts I'm getting are different than the facts that they're getting. It's impossible to resolve this argument because I have a different set of facts than the opposition.
An extremely intelligent man like Elon Musk, for example, supports heavily Donald Trump. How can it be? Can he see something we don't?
He sees the exact same thing I see. He is smart. What he sees is that Trump is corrupt and can be bought. And he's just looking out for himself and his businesses and his personal wealth. There's a Republican Party, which is Trump, and there's the Democrats, the opposition. And the Democrats are more left, as I am, and want to tax the rich more environmental regulations, let's say. You know, it's a gross simplification. But the right wants to let business do whatever it wants and tax rich people less. And so if you're Elon Musk, a very intelligent, very, very rich business person, of course it makes sense, unless you're altruistic, which he is not, it makes sense for him to support the right because he sees this is a guy who will let me do anything I want with my businesses. This is a guy who is not going to raise my taxes and in fact is going to lower my taxes, even though he's already the richest man in the world. So why he needs more money, I have no idea. So it does make sense, but I think it says a lot about Elon Musk's character and where his values lie versus anything else.
Are you altruistic?
Not as much as I wish I was, but in my fantasy I am.
Do you like Ayn Rand, for example?
I've read Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, and I love both of those books, and I think they're really interesting. The Fountainhead more, because it's really about integrity. But I think the problem with Ayn Rand is that it's so idealistic. You have to live in the real world. So like the stuff that she describes, like you can't get to that idealistic place.
So you are accusing Elon Musk and business people about not being honest.
I mean, not all business people. I think that, don't necessarily want to make an enemy of Elon Musk and have him come after me, but I doubt that will happen. I think I'm the fly on the dragon's back on that one.
I mean, not specifically for Elon Musk, but in general, startup people isn't trustable according to your book, so he's not trustable.
I wouldn't say that. I think most people are doing the best they can in the situation that they're in, especially when you're young or have like a lower position. You don't see the big picture. You can't imagine all the consequences of your actions. At any given time, you don't know what pressures people are under. And so you see someone at work and they act a certain way, and maybe their home life is falling apart. And if you knew that, if you knew the whole picture, you'd have more empathy. I really try to have empathy for people and try to see where someone is coming from because I want people to have empathy for me.
Why wouldn't they have empathy for you? I mean, you're a good man. You look like a good man.
It depends who you talk to. If you talk to some of the people I've worked for, some of the people who've worked under me, like they might have a different opinion.
What have you done?
That typically the people who work for me like me much more than the people I work for because I can be difficult.
Can you elaborate a little bit? How can you be difficult?
Because I say what I think. And sometimes people don't want to hear. People want to hear what they want to hear. They want to hear the truth that they believe, not the truth that you believe. And then also they want to convince you of their truth. Some people in companies just act like if the CEO believes something, they say, yeah, I believe that too. I wouldn't say I'm pure and I've never done that, but typically I don't do that.
It's good to have you on your side, someone like you, because we need pessimists.
I am definitely a glass is half full. I'm like a glass is half full and it's filled with broken glass. So I'm very pessimistic. To be a CEO, a successful startup CEO, and I've never been a CEO. Like I've had many opportunities to do that. And I've always been the number 2 guy, the operations guy, because I want to be the guy who will say it'll never work. And here are the 10 reasons why. Because if you're a CEO, you have to believe something is impossible and will happen. And you just have to have this belief and you're selling all the time. And so I've certainly talked to venture capitalists and pitched and sold and said things I didn't believe, for the sake of my company. But like, I'd rather be supporting someone in that than like be generating that all the time. If I'm being honest, like being honest and being a salesperson are two very different things. And I would prefer to be more honest. So I like to be the guy behind closed doors saying to the CEO, let me tell you like the top 10 reasons why this won't work. But that can be a great partnership because if they really believe, then we'll pick the one thing that is less likely to fail than the other things.
I feel like I'm talking to Caleb, actually. You are exactly like your character.
Not exactly. There's more of me in Caleb than there is of me in any other character I've created.
Do you follow Turkish politics?
I know just enough to be dangerous. So I think that if I said anything, it would just be probably more ignorant than knowledgeable. So I'd rather talk about Trump.
Your answer is sufficient. Among intellectuals in Turkey, there's a strong belief that, especially from the left, America is falling. Do you think the same?
Yeah, all empires fail at some point. I think it will be devastating to America if Trump is elected.
Can the fate be changed with one incident? I mean, if Trump is elected, so America will fall directly, or is it a process?
The reason Trump is such a danger to the United States, and I would say by extension the world, if he was just a terrible, awful person, which I think he is, and did terrible, awful things, which I think he has done, and the Republican Party, his party, held him accountable for those things, then that would be that. America is a system with lots of checks and balances between the Supreme Court and the Senate.
But he's messing with those.
But the problem is the party has been completely corrupted and there are people who are smart. I think Trump believes most of his lies, but I think party leaders in the Republican Party do not believe those lies, but say they do believe those lies and just get behind him because they know that if they disagree with him, he will work hard to get them out of power. The danger of Trump is not that he's corrupt, it's that he makes everyone around him corrupt. And then all the fail-safes are gone.
Classical tyrant.
Yeah.
Let's change the subject. It's an unpleasant subject. What about Gen Z? Because in the book, you look at Z a little bit condescending.
Yes, but that's always the case. Every 50-year-old looks like a 20-year-old and thinks what an idiot they are. And the whole generation, why are they doing X? And that has happened since the dawn of time. And when I was 20 years old, people looked at me and thought I was stupid. And in ways I was, and in ways I wasn't.
You are always making references to pop culture from our time. They don't have a clue.
Yeah, because it's incomprehensible to me that like somebody hasn't seen Back to the Future or Terminator because it's the most classic movie, but you talk to people and they haven't. And that's when you really realize that you're getting older. One of the reasons I liked working with startups is I actually really like working with young people. And I like being a mentor. And I get energy out of their youthful energy. I love young people. But it makes you feel like you're 100 years old when you make a joke that has a pop reference in it and they have no idea what you're talking about. And you realize, like, how could you have never seen Back to the Future? And the answer could be because it was made 15 years before I was born. And then you want to put a bullet in your head. That's the tough thing. There's more of me in Caleb than in any other character I've written, but it's like the worst parts of me are in him. I definitely lose my patience, but he loses his patience more.
Are you afraid of dying?
Sure, isn't everybody?
What about aging? You don't like aging.
I hate it.
So, in 10 years, maybe it will be solved.
Because I'll be dead?
No, they are working on it. Are you into these things?
I'm intrigued by it. I think like many things, it would like go badly. I read one book. Oh, I think it Altered Carbon.
They made into
a Netflix series. I never saw the series. But without going into too much detail, it was like there was an ability to dramatically lengthen your life, but it was expensive. And so what happens is only like the rich people do it. And the richer you are and the older you are, you become more and more and more powerful. How is it going to work out if Elon Musk lives forever? Not well, I think. Yeah. So because he's already incredibly powerful. And one of the things that happens in life is powerful people die. And so by definition, that power has to be transferred to other people. And I think if like these billionaires get incredible longevity, it will make the pond stagnant versus like a river. And so right now life is like a river and people come and people go. But if you have a pond that's isolated, crap grows in it.
You can become a tyrant.
Yeah, you can become a tyrant, everything else like that. I would say the good thing about age though is like you understand things. And I think I'm much more empathetic now than I was when I was younger because you reference your own experience. things. So I remember what it was like to be 20, to be 30, to be 40. And so when I'm talking to somebody of that age, I can put myself in their shoes. And where when I was 20, I couldn't put myself in the shoes of a 50-year-old. So I might think that the old person was being incredibly unreasonable.
But at the end of the day, it's always, oops, I made that mistake.
Right.
And it's gone.
Yeah.
What about AI? Because I asked ChatGPT, what can I ask to Adam Fawer? He had some very boring questions. For example, how do you balance scientific accuracy with creative license in your novels? I think he's boring.
Well, it's all about the prompt, and it's about narrowing the prompt down. So like you asked, what are interesting questions you could ask of me? And then when it gave that answer, you could say that's a little too generic. Can you get something a little deeper under the skin? Or you'd have to make the prompt something like, imagine you're a host on a show and you have a guest and the guest is Adam Fawer and you want to make him really uncomfortable. What question would you ask? You get more interesting answers.
Can it write a novel one day?
100%.
A good novel?
That's a really interesting question. So because I'm a writer, I read lots of fiction just because I love to read. And sometimes I read stuff that's like super popular, but that isn't particularly my taste, just from a business perspective of like what is selling. I don't want to denigrate any author, so I won't. But I read a particular book recently that was incredibly popular and I thought was terrible.
Maybe ChatGPT wrote it.
And well, what I think is it was terrible because the characters kept doing things that real people would never do. And it was just like the whole time I was rolling my eyes because I couldn't stand it. In a couple of years, ChatGPT could write that book. So I think ChatGPT could write a bad novel or a very, very cliched novel. Can it get to artistry? That's a question. Ultimately, I think probably. Early in our conversation, you asked about, time travel's been done so much,
yes.
Right? And there's like, you can point to probably lots of different aspects of my book. Oh, this is like this movie. This is like this TV show. This is like this other book. So what I write is a product of every artistic thing I've ever consumed. But I'm just one person and have limits to what I can consume. And ChatGPT, there are limits, but their limit is 1 million times greater than mine, 10 million times greater than mine. So it can pull from all these other artists that I've never been exposed to. So I definitely think it can write a book. I definitely think it could, at this point, it would be a bad book. It would just be like those questions were bad questions. But I think ultimately it can get there and write something really amazing.
My problem is if I'm going to try to get the good questions, I will waste my time trying to elaborate my prompts. I'll come up with good questions myself. So isn't it better?
It's a good thinking partner. I've used ChatGPT a tiny bit with this book. Just a couple things. Like when I was just tired, I was like, tell me all the qualities of a fancy New York restaurant. Something like that.
Technical stuff. Yeah.
Technical stuff, just to like get my brain going and to start to picture the room. I've used it like that. In my new book, I have somebody going to like a part of Queens where like a lot of Indian people live. And I've never been there. And I intend to go, but I just wanted to like get my head moving. So I like searched for Google Images. I went to ChatGPT. I said, describe the street. I don't take it verbatim, but it starts my creative process and it starts the ball rolling. That's the toughest thing when you're staring at the empty page. Every day when I sit down to write, the toughest thing is starting. When you get into the groove, then it's easy.
So your new book is coming up. Good luck. It's a very good book. I read it in 2 days, 500 pages, unbelievable. Any plans for a new book?
Yeah, I'm working. So that book is about, well, I don't know what the Turkish version is. The US version is about 120,000 words. I'm 125,000 words into my new novel, but it will be like 250, 300,000 before I cut it back.
Is it a science fiction again?
It's science fiction. It takes place in the world of startups because, again, I have like a lot of expertise in that. I feel like there are so many stories to tell in that world, and I enjoyed living in this one.
Your education on statistics, I think it helped your writing, right?
I mean, statistics help me write improbable because I talk a lot about probability theory.
But you have a scientific
Everything that like makes you think in a rigorous way helps the creative process because I think there's obviously creativity in the creative process, but it's a lot of rote things, just pushing yourself to do it every single day.
Do you miss working for startups?
I do.
Because it's a very fast and dynamic environment.
It's very fast. It's very dynamic. The day just goes. I enjoy like so many of the people that work in startups and I enjoy the pace. What I don't enjoy is the stress. And what I don't enjoy is constantly like you're always lying a little bit.
Yes.
Because you have to lie to your investors and tell them things are going to happen that you don't quite believe in. You have to lie to your employees, also telling them different things will happen that you also don't believe in. And it can wear on your soul, or it certainly wore on mine. So now I prefer to advise people, and because that's pure, because I can just say, these are your options, some moral, some amoral, and here are all the outcomes that could happen. Do whatever you want.
It was an honor to have you. Thank you very much.
It was an honor to be here.
Good luck with your book. You will be traveling Turkey.
Traveling a ton for the next 3 weeks.
Good luck and have a good voyage.
Teşekkürler.
Aydaki Adam devam edecek. Görüşmek üzere.